Okay. So we're on the Lark, chapter 3, page 154 in this book. To be vicious does not ensure prosperity. The inn, in fact, was not doing well. Thanks to Fantine's 57 francs, Thénardier had been able to avoid a lawsuit and honor his signature. The next month they were still in need of money, and the woman carried Cosette's wardrobe to Paris and pawned it for 60 francs. When the sum was spent, the Thénardiers began to look on the little girl as a child they sheltered for charity, and treat her accordingly. Her clothes being gone, they dressed her in the cast-off skirts and blouses of the little Thénardiers, that is, in rags. They fed her on everyone's leftovers, a little better than the dog, but a little worse than the cat. The dog and cat were her messmates. Cosette ate with them under the table off a wooden dish like theirs. Her mother, who, as we shall later see, had found a job at Montreuil-sur-Mer, wrote, or rather had someone write for her every month, asking for news of her child. The Thénardiers invariably replied, "Cosette is doing wonderfully well." The 6 months passed. The mother sent 7 francs for the 7th month, and continued to send the sum regularly month after month. The year was not over before Thénardier said, "It's not enough. What does she expect us to do for her 7 francs?" And he wrote demanding 12 francs. The mother, persuaded that her child was happy and doing well, agreed, and forwarded the 12 francs. There are certain natures that cannot have love on one side without hatred on the other. Madame Thénardier passionately loved her own little ones, and therefore detested the young stranger. It is sad to realize that a mother's love can have such a dark side. Little as was the place Cosette occupied in the house, it seemed to her that this little was taken from her children, and that Cosette decreased the air her girls breathed. This woman, like many of her kind, had a certain amount of caresses and a certain amount of blows and hard words to dispense each day. If she had not had Cosette, surely her daughters, idolized as they were, would have received it all. But the little stranger did them the service of attracting the blows to herself. Her children had only the caresses. Cosette could not stir without drawing down on herself a hailstorm of undeserved and severe chastisements. A frail, gentle little one, who must not have understood anything of this world or of God, continually ill-treated, scolded, punished, beaten. She saw beside her 2 other young things like herself who lived in a halo of glory. The woman was unkind to Cosette, and Éponine and Azelma were unkind too. Éponine and Azelma are also important, but especially Éponine. Children at that age are simply copies of the mother, only the size is reduced. A year passed, and then another. People in the village said, "What good folk those Thénardiers are! They're not rich, and yet they bring up a poor abandoned child." They thought Cosette was forgotten by her mother. So the Thénardiers appear on the surface to be really rather good people, but we know that underneath they are not. So if you're pulling up the theme of appearance versus reality, or the public face versus the private self, these would be a good example of that particular theme. Meanwhile, Thénardier, having learned in some obscure way that the child was probably illegitimate, and that her mother could not acknowledge her, demanded 15 francs a month, saying that the creature was growing and eating and threatening to send her away. "She won't get around me," he exclaimed. "I'll drop the brat right down in her hideout. I have to have more money." The mother paid the 15 francs. From year to year the child grew, and her misery too. So long as Cosette was very small, she was the scapegoat of the other 2 children. As soon as she began to grow a little, that is to say before she was 5 years old, she became the servant of the house. 5 years old. It will be said that's hard to believe, but it's true. Social suffering can begin at any age. Didn't we see recently the trial of Dumoulard, an orphan turned bandit, who from the age of 5, say the official documents, being alone in the world, was working for his living and stole? Cosette was made to run errands, sweep the rooms, the yard, the street, wash the dishes, and even carry heavy loads. The Thénardiers felt doubly authorized to treat her this way, as the mother, who still remained at Montreuil-sur-Mer, began to be remiss in her payments. Some months remained due. Had this mother returned to Montfermeil at the end of these 3 years, she would not have known her child. Cosette, so fresh and pretty when she came to that house, was now thin and pale. She had a peculiarly restless air. "A sneak," said the Thénardiers. Injustice had made her sullen, and misery had made her ugly. Only her eyes remained beautiful, and they were painful to look at, because large as they were, they seemed to increase the sadness. It was harrowing to see the poor child, in winter, not yet 6 years old, shivering under the tatters of what was once a calico dress, sweeping the street before daylight with an enormous broom in her little red hands, and tears in her large eyes. In the neighborhood she was called the Lark. People liked figurative names, and were happy to give a nickname to this child, no larger than a bird, trembling, frightened, and shivering, first to wake every morning in the house and the village, always in the street or in the fields before dawn, except that the poor lark never sang. All right, pull quotes. We're going to start at book 5 on the next video.